of the bass, without talking about this for, really too involved, but, the movement of the bass in the composition is like the most damn important thing. You can listen to, I think it was Brahms. People would bring a composition over to Brahms, and he would put his hand in the middle of the page and just see the melody and the bass line.
I have been a fan of today's guest for years. I played his music in so many bass ensembles and solo performances, and my students played his music, and it was so cool to connect with him in person. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and it was such a pleasure to open up the AFM, American Federation of Musicians, Local 6 paper and see that Dr. Norman Ludwin was coming to San Francisco to do a talk. I checked out the talk, and the next morning we got together, had some breakfast, and sat down for this interview. I know you're going to dig this. We go into all sorts of topics like his early training, his time in the Florida Symphony, and in Durban, South Africa, getting into the LA studio recording world and how that changed, getting into the world of composition and orchestration and how he built the world's largest bass catalog. So many topics, so much fun. I know you're going to love this conversation. And a quick shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, Steve Swan String Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, A440 Violin Shop, Modacity and Coda, and Colstein Music. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation with Norman Ludwin. Live at all. So, although you're very well spoken, so I don't have to worry. Yeah. So and I don't do an intro or anything. I'll intro you before, but here we are in San Francisco, and one of the fun things about living in San Francisco is people come through San Francisco, and I was so excited to open up the Local 6 AFM Local 6 paper, and I saw Norman Ludwin coming to San Francisco, and I reached out, and so here we are chatting. So thanks for hanging.
Oh, this is great, Jason. Thank you for reaching out to me and letting me know that you're interested. I love it up here. I don't come up that often, but my cousin lives near here, in Los Altos.
Okay.
So for years I would come up and visit them. Get my Frisco thing in.
And why were you in San Francisco?
I was here to give a talk to Local 6, talk on developing variation. Local 6 Union brought me up to do a seminar for their members. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I was at.
That's right.
Really interesting. And also
you misbehaved quite a bit, but we won't get into that.
Okay, yeah, that's true. I'm notorious for that. But yeah, going through all these musical examples and motivic development and how different composers, the Symphony Espagnole you went through, and Coltrane, which, by the way, last night I went home and I found that lost album. I forget what the one is, but you brought up.
Yes, that one that he released with all those untitled tunes and stuff. That's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jimmy Garrison plays great.
I was listening
on that record.
Early on that record, there was some arco solos.
That's
right off the bat.
That's right.
Yeah,
right
so that
off
was
the bat.
So
you're right. He did that long arco solo thing. He does a lot. Where he just open-ended sort of a thing. But no, that's a wonderful record. And I was particularly, I listened to that. It's funny because I do a lot of traveling, and I have these sound reduction headphones that I'm in love with. Yeah. And so I'm on the plane, for 10 hours, sometimes 12 hours, and sometimes I don't have, I maybe have 6 or 7 tracks really that I can only really listen to sometimes. So I listen to that thing, that record, 20 times, and really, really closely with these digital headphones, Anyways, I really do appreciate Jimmy's playing on that. He's always great, but he plays fantastic on that. That was a wonderful period.
Oh yeah, he does, and it was great. I was just, and even this morning I was listening a little bit more to that Coltrane and thinking about motives and motivic development. And you said last night, and it's so true. It's like that's a huge part of Coltrane's playing.
It is. That's a big part of Train's thing, and he was known for that. I mean, you can hear him starting an idea, boo-da-dee, 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 boo-da-dee-dee. You can hear him just taking the things apart. He did that with Miles. Really, it's a part of his playing. Really, it was. Yeah, I'm not a big jazz scholar, but if somebody wanted to, I'm sure they have, done analysis, doctoral things on Train's evolution. Yeah, he was really great with that. You can see him, you can hear him, taking pieces apart, motivically developing it. Really, is what he's doing in a jazz way. It's really far out.
So I was just telling Norman this story at breakfast, but I have to share it for the podcast too, if that's okay. Okay, so when I started teaching and coaching bass ensembles, I was looking for music, and Ludwin Music, this treasure trove of pieces, so like duets, trios, bass ensembles, and I was the orchestra director. I was talking to him. I said, "Well, let's get this stuff," and he just like ordered. It was like a drawer of your compositions, your arrangements, and I confirmed these details. So I'm working on a bass ensemble for solo and ensemble, and we pull out Norman's A Love Story, which is a super cool piece. And there's this improvised section, and there's an instruction to the bass players, which was what exactly?
I think it was play like you're making love.
Okay, which was the most entertaining thing that the high school bass players had seen all year, right? And they took it to the extreme. Like one of them had a cowbell that they started playing, and they started like dancing around in the bass, and it was just like great. And then so we're getting ready for solo and ensemble, and I then give that score to the director, who was not really aware of what we were doing. He's like, you can't use this or so. Not like there's anything wrong with making love, but it was just like it's like this school kind of thing. So the director said, okay, well, you're going to play it, but he took a little bit of whiteout tape and he covered up that instruction. He censored your piece. Yeah. Which, so that they perform, and I'm in the performance watching, and I know what's about to happen, because you don't know this is going to happen. They're like playing different themes and that sort of thing, and then all of a sudden the cowbell comes out, and I'm looking at the judge who's looking at the score and holding it up to the light, trying to figure out what's being covered up. So I've been following what you do for years, and you've got this great career arc that's super interesting. So maybe let's go back to if you're okay with that, the very beginning. And I think you started bass in like elementary school.
I started bass in elementary school. I started piano. My father played piano. My uncle played piano. So I had some lessons with my uncle, and there was a piano around the house. And the bass story is pretty typical bass, funny story. The teacher would show an instrument every week to the class and ask them, does anybody want to play that? And so one day he showed the bass. I guess he had a bass there, and a half-size bass. And I was a class clown, right? Nothing changed. And I said, I'll do it. And I think when I thought about it, I think I had seen an upright bass player at Disneyland in New Orleans Square. New Orleans Square always had a jazz band. From, they always had music. They probably still do. So anyways, I'm trying to think, because I don't know why it attracted me. I think that's what it was. So that's how I started. I had a little half-size bass, and so I was probably in, I guess, about fourth grade, really young, and started playing bass then.
And you played a lot of other instruments too. You took home instruments.
I took.
Sort of experimented. Yeah.
I did a lot of experimentation when I got to junior high, which I guess is seventh grade, right back in the day. I played in the orchestra. Was first bass, but then I got out of orchestra because I had to take an art class and blah 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 blah. So, actually, between I guess that seventh grade, I was probably 11. So between 11 and really 17. I didn't play bass classically. I had the bass, but eventually I played in the orchestra bassoon. I played the orchestra bassoon because my father said, wow, there's no bassoonists. If you play bassoon, you can play in the orchestra or something like that. And he was absolutely right. There were no bassoonists. And so when I went to high school, I went to a good it was a good high school, but it was a good music program. It was called Grant High in Van Nuys or North Hollywood in San Fernando Valley, and I was the only bassoonist because there really were no bassoonists. So I could have played bass too, but anyway. So point is, I played bassoon through those years. I had the bass. I played jazz with the bass. That's all. I had a bow somewhere floating around, but it wasn't really my thing. But I loved jazz, and that's what I did with the bass, was playing jazz with the bass, and I did that. I played some other instruments, like you said. Somebody would give me a trumpet, and I would take it home, and saxophone, I would screw around with it. But then then when I went looking for college, I was playing bassoon in the CalArts Youth Orchestra, and their big campus they had built back in the that period. And I remember walking around the hallways, and I saw on the board listing of the teachers who's teaching there, I saw the name Buell Neidlinger. And I knew that name through Cecil Taylor's jazz recordings and things like that. So I knew the guy's name. I didn't know who he was. And so I called him and said I wanted to take bass lessons. This was before, and I guess I was also thinking about college. So that's how I got involved at CalArts. And so I got accepted as a bass player. Buell accepted me, and so I went to CalArts as a bass player.
Well, and we were talking also, my bass teacher for all through college, Michael Hovnanian, went to CalArts too. And I've been up there, actually took some students up there maybe 10 years ago to that campus, which is beautiful. And I associate, I think of CalArts and like UC Santa Cruz, kind of like in a similar way. I did a little teaching there, and it's like a very, free sort of place. What was that place like? And then what was Buell is one of those legends that most bass players have heard that name. What was that experience like?
Well, it's funny. I wanted to go to Santa Cruz too. That was my other school to go. Considering, well, it's funny because Bay Area. My cousin who lives in Los Altos taught at Santa Cruz, and so I went up in that year, my last high school year, and hung out at Santa Cruz, and I loved it. They'd be getting high all the time, and these. The whole trip up there was lovely, but they had no music department, really. So CalArts was wild then. It was, we're talking 74, right? And it was very experimental, the whole place. And musically, it was great for me. It was a hard push for me because, for me personally, I was young. I was 17, right? And CalArts at that time was really geared more to like 25-year-olds or even 22-year-olds. Everybody older than me, So I had a tough time personally with trying to connect with women and such, just because I was just a little too young at that time to that's just my own personal shit. But I dug it musically. The good thing about it as a bass player was that we had a lot of chamber music. And particularly, we had Baroque chamber music. And so I played from the very beginning. I would play in Baroque ensemble. So I would be playing, continuo, harpsichord bass, sometimes harpsichord bass, cello. And that really teaches you how to work and play in tune, much more than sitting in an orchestra. Like when I went to USC for master's work 4 years later, you're in a bass section. And, you can hide a lot in a bass section, but when you're just playing one and a part. So that was very good to have that opportunity at CalArts.
What was that, in that era, what was the film music scene like in L.A.? Was that I always, in my mind, I think you might have said this last time too, but I always think of the 80s as like the real heyday for that, and then the business started to change, going ahead. But what was that like when you were going? Were you aware of that work? Was there a lot of that kind of work?
I wasn't aware of it, to be honest with you. But it was bigger. And actually, people say that there was a strike. There was a strike in 83, 84. The Musicians Union went on strike to get residuals for television. And they lost the strike. And so a lot of people say that the business actually was less after when I got into it. But no, when I was at CalArts, I knew about studio music. I mean, you knew about the world of studio music. I didn't know anything about really what it meant or could I do it or something like that, or how, or what it was involved with or anything like that. No, that wasn't even in my really mind. The back of my mind was I knew that it was that business, and I knew I wanted to be in that business. It took me, I didn't see a direct path at that point.
So CalArts and then USC right after that?
I went to USC for a year, and, didn't like it so much, really. I did a good orchestra, though. I had a good orchestra experience. Of course, Daniel Lewis was a good conductor. I'll never forget, we're starting a rehearsal, and basses are tuning. We talked about this earlier at breakfast. And he goes, "All right, basses, I know only dogs hear that low, but let's tune it up." I forgot that.
Pretty good disc.
It is a pretty good disc. But so I went to SC for a year, and then I left it, and then I went to Florida.
That's what,
Right.
and that was the Florida.
A Florida Gulf Coast Orchestra, which is now called the Florida Orchestra. The reason why it's tricky is that there's like 3 orchestras in Florida. There's a Florida Orchestra, there's a Florida Symphony, which is Orlando, then there was the Miami Philharmonic, which I don't think is happening anymore. But I went to Florida because of a girl, of course. I fell in love with a girl, Lisa, her name was. And so I moved down there, and then once I was there, then I got in the Florida Orchestra.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a lot of people who don't live in either California or Florida might think, oh, aren't those kind of similar? You got Disneyland, Disney World, this and that. I sort of thought that growing up in the Midwest. Now living in California and going to Florida, they seem like vastly different worlds. Culturally, it's 95 and humid for half the year. Just a lot of things. What was that? Had you spent time in Florida before?
Before that? No.
Okay. What was that experience going down there like?
Well, in some ways I loved it.
Yeah.
Because it's tropical and it's the beach where I was. First place I lived in Sarasota. I don't know if you know that. It was really beautiful, and I was in love. So the whole thing was a lot of fun. But you're right. I mean, by the second year, I knew that I was going to have to leave because there wasn't much else there. Yeah. You played in the symphony, and I played in shows, you know what I mean? I did play some jazz. I mean, I did whatever I could do, but there wasn't anywhere more going on. And, Florida is the South. Yeah. People say it ain't the South, but it's the South. And so there's a lot of racial separation, really, even in Florida and Tampa. And so it had some funky elements to it a little bit. Very conservative place in a way. But, I liked, in general, I liked it. You're right. The summer months, you just have to go inside airco. And that's just about what that is.
What happened after that? Where'd you go?
Well, what happened
next?
is I came back to LA, and then I decided I had to go to Europe because everyone was getting jobs in Europe. Back in that time, bass players particularly, the word was Europe, meaning the Netherlands, Germany, really those places, really, who had a lot of orchestras, a lot of radio orchestras. They liked American bass players, and I had a number of friends who went over there and got these jobs and stuff. So I went over and I did some festivals and such, and then I got a job in South Africa. All right, so I got a job in South Africa. The South African Orchestra's Durban Orchestra came to Los Angeles. They were looking for forming new, orchestra, new orchestra, and so I auditioned, and I got the job of co-principal. Eventually was kind of, at first it was just a normal second, then I guess I was always second base there. That was always what my position was. But so that's what I did.
How long were you there?
I was there, well, about a year and a half.
Okay. I've never been to South Africa. First of all, I have a hard time. I can picture Cape Town.
Yes.
And kind of Johannesburg. Where's Durban?
Durban is on the East Coast.
Okay.
Durban is near Madagascar.
Okay.
Durban is the English province, more English, British kind of province of South Africa. Cape Town, Johannesburg, Pretoria is more Afrikaner, heartland. Cape Town's a wonderful city, but Durban is just a very British kind of a vibe. I had a lot of fun, really. I mean, it was a newly formed orchestra. We had I'd say probably about a half Americans, about a quarter Brits, and then maybe another quarter Europeans and some South Africans. There was a big mix, a lot of young people mostly in the group. It was a full-time job. It was an extra check in your birthday month.
Really?
Yeah, extra check in your birthday month. We had apartheid. Right, and
that's right.
Yeah, it was a big thing. It was the apartheid era, and for me, the experience was very involved because I played a lot of jazz. I played more jazz in South Africa than I did in L.A. and it would be mixed bands. And you play jazz clubs, it would be mixed. I know a lot of black guys down there and got to know them, and go to the townships and drive them around and just sort of get involved. And I met a South African woman, and I married her. I later divorced her, but so my South African experience was a very full life experience because I knew her parents and the whole thing, So it was great, really, in that sense. Wonderful place. But then I left. I left partly because I needed to move on, really. I needed to move on. Plus, I left when the racial stuff was getting really bad. They declared another state of emergency, and it was more difficult to kind of navigate around the city the way I did, what I had been used to. The dollar took a big plunge too. The rand, the rand took a big plunge between about a year and a year and a half. The value. So I was making money actually. I was actually sending money home when I was started there because I was I was playing 3 orchestras in L.A. I was doing no money. I was not making any money really in L.A. really. So this was the first chance to make any kind of real money. But then the rand fell so much that wasn't an option, as I say, and the political thing was getting worse. So I came back to L.A.
This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. Whether resetting your sound post, installing a new bridge, or giving your fingerboard one of their precision dressings, the Bass Violin Shop will work with you to improve your setup. They also specialize in resetting necks, repairing cracks, installing new fingerboards, and new bass bars. Whatever your playing needs, they will listen carefully to you and work hard to get the most out of your instrument without blowing your budget. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
Hey, Jason, this is Barry Green calling, the bass player from Cincinnati and then California, and now I'm back in Cincinnati, and we're having a lovely snowstorm right now on the 24th of March. Are you kidding me? Springtime. Anyway, I'm just checking in to talk about how cool not just Diodario strings are, but the entire organization. Like Lyris and all of the bosses there, they are so supportive of the arts, of music, what they do for music, and music programs around the world with the foundation, and supporting the artists and the many clinics that I have done as well for them and through them and with their support. They are the most amazing human beings. So when I play my Diodario strings, I not only share music sounds, but I'm spreading the Diodario message of benevolence and good fortune and dedication to music. I've always enjoyed the Diodario strings because they're so universally cool. They work for orchestra playing, they work for solo playing. They have so many models that are possible, from a hybrid string for an orchestra player or a solo bass player. You get a little more edge with the hybrid. The mediums are great for most instruments, but I find that sometimes the instrument, not the strings, but the instrument needs a little help in the certain registers, and therefore it's like a prescription. It's kind of like a person. If you're fat or if you're skinny, you're going to wear clothes that make you look better. And so if your bass has a nice high register and needs some help on the bottom, then you want something that helps enhance the bottom. So find the clothes the cool thing about Diodario is that they have a lot of clothes in their closet. And so we're going to take all those Diodario strings out of the closet and fit it on our unique basses and get them all to look really, really cool. All right, Jason, I hope this is helpful. And I know Diodario is helpful to the world. Bye.
This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And you know, there's a lot that goes into being a bass player beyond that initial purchase of a bass. We need bass bows, we need bass covers, we need stands, we need new strings, pickups, wheels, quivers, upgraded gear like tuning machines, end pins, repair parts, all of that. And when someone's looking for some new bass gear or to upgrade something on their bass, I send them to Steve's shop. He's located just south of San Francisco in the Bay Area, and he is the largest dealer in basses between Los Angeles and Canada. That is a big distance, folks. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com. And thank you so much, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast. What did you think you were going to do when you came back to LA? Like at that moment? I mean,
Good question, really.
If you've been like, you know, kind of just trying to make it work in LA, and then you go and you get this job, and finally you got some stability, and then everything starts to kind of come unraveled, at least in some ways. So yeah, what was your...
That's a good question, really, because... you know, in South Africa, the playing was great because I was playing 8 services a week and a fairly high level. So my playing was a lot, was up, and I did solo concerts, a lot of solo concerts down there. You know, I would do Hindemith Sonata, Percussive Bellamano, I did anything I wanted, really. You know, I mean, I was able to get my own music. I started writing more music. I had the time. So I had that opportunity to... which was good because I needed to do something with the bass, you know. So that was good. When I came back, I guess in the back of my mind was to try to get into the studio business. Really, it was kind of a crapshoot, really. I mean,
but you did end up getting into that.
I did end up getting into it.
How did that unfold?
I forced them.
Really?
Well, it happened really again through this Buell. Yeah. Buell was. He's one of those very complex characters of, you know, the way I describe him, he was like one of these Buddhist, I don't want to call it God, but Buddhist symbols of a good face and an evil face, right? You know, a two-faced kind of a person. And he had a wonderful side. He was one of the greatest teachers. One of the greatest teachers to teach bass players how to play musically. He played so musically. He started as a cellist. He played the bass unlike anybody I'd ever met, and still to some degree. I mean, just the approach to play it lightly and beautiful sound, and not a heavy vibrato, and to play musically and in tune, was wonderful, right? But then he had this side of like an energy vampire. You know, he would cause problems amongst people and riff off the bad vibes created by that.
Boy, that's fat. That's a great term. I have, as most of us, been around people like that. It's like it's sort of like, yeah, okay, wow, interesting.
Yeah, he really got off on that and pitting people against each other, you know. But in his supportive side, you know, he was great. So when I get back to L.A., I went over to his house. You know, his wife also played bass, Margaret. Anyways, I played for him, and we read some sight reading. We did some sight reading together, and I bought my bass through him. I mean, anyways, the point is that he started putting me in his section. It was really what it was, you know. And the way it works is. Not as much anymore, but back then, you had principals, you know, and they put sections together, you know, and kind of told the contractor, you know, who they wanted. And as long as it worked out and the contractor sort of got to know you, then you were in.
Well, in a different hotel in San Francisco a few years ago, I was chatting with a bass player that I played with occasionally at the New World Symphony, Mike Valerio.
Oh, yeah, I know Mike.
And Mike was talking about so he moved to LA, I think it was like in the early 2000s or something like that. And he was talking about how there had been, I think this is basically what he said. There had been like the equivalent of 5 orchestras worth of musicians playing these studio gigs, kind of at the heyday. And he said now being, it was like 2016, 2017, there was like the equivalent of 1.
That's true. I don't know if I would say there were 5, but during the time I'm talking about, during the 90s, let's say late in the 80s and 90s, there was certainly 2.
Okay.
There's certainly 2. I mean, there's always people floating around, but yeah, there were a good 2 orchestras working at one time. And so if you're part of a different squad, then your squad was working, the other squad would be working the other side of town. You jumped in between. I mean, I would work in Buell's section, but I would also work in Chuck DeMonaco, late Chuck DeMonaco, or Arnie Egilson, or Milt Kestenbaum, late Milton Kestenbaum, who Milt was played in Toscanini's orchestra, NBC Toscanini Orchestra. He taught at SC, so I'd study with him in SC, and he had a bit of his kind of group, So yes, there was a lot of work back then. Everybody worked, not everybody, but I mean, you worked a lot.
And you talk to people in New York City, and I remember, there are stories about, people quitting the New York Philharmonic just to do the freelance work.
Oh, yeah.
I think Homer Mensch did that. It was more lucrative to do that. I remember even Chicago, smaller scene than those places, but still the commercial work and you're day and night. And what you're describing, like kind of being part of a camp or part of a tribe, and maybe you cross over, maybe you don't. I think that's the way it is still, like in the theater world, for example, in New York, talking to people, and you can have the equivalent of a full-time job doing all this work, but then it can be very unpredictable, right? And then there was this down. I'm sure there are a bunch of factors that made that work start to dry up. But like, what are some of what happened? Why'd the culture change?
I see. Well, you had runaway production. You had overseas production. I see it was a combination of factors, but basically the rise of sampling, right? So the rise of the home studio, one aspect. Second aspect, it was the industry's desire to crush the union, which is still in existence, crush organized kind of factors. Then you had the third. Well, just financial. They didn't want to pay the back end. They wanted to screw with the union like they have with the auto industry and all these other industries. So and the rise of internet, and the rise of Seattle. Seattle is a big culprit, really. Seattle, left the union and placed itself as a non-union orchestra, and at lower prices. What I mean by back end is back end would be money that goes to your pension and money that goes to residuals, and the residuals is a big issue for recording musicians, because what the residuals represent is you play in a movie, and then if the movie goes to a different format than it was originally created, you get like it gets technical, but you get a dividing of what the producers grows 1%. But this can mean a nice amount of money. I mean, some people get a lot of money. Some people get 6 figures. Other people get 5 figures. So and so it was something that was hard fought by the union, and by the way, all the other guilds get them. SAG-AFTRA gets them, blah blah blah. I'm a whole union talk here because I'm involved with it. So a lot of that's what had to do. A lot of it had to do with that the industry realized that they could get something scored in Budapest or in Mississippi or in Seattle or Marin County someplace, and cut out all these overheads. So that's a lot of really what happened, And then there were mistakes made, on the union side, unfortunately, sort of being intransigent towards some negotiations. So, the whole situation changed. And plus, there's no more records. We don't make records anymore that involve orchestras. And the big thing too is the change in television. Because when I was starting, I did a lot of TV work. I mean, that's what you did. You were doing movies, a couple of movies a month, let's say, but a lot of the stuff you did were TV. I did Star Treks. I did Lost, of course, with Michael Giacchino. But recording musicians did a lot of TV. And that socially changed. They just know that could be done so much cheaper by one guy, sampling it, that the live TV thing went out the window.
If you look at what you're doing now, it's like it seems like a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And then that's since like mid '80s that this is starting to happen. Late '80s.
The change?
Yeah.
I would say no. I started in the business in the mid '80s.
So this is in the '90s.
Yeah. I would say this is more of the 2000s.
This is into the 2000s. Okay.
The end of the end of the '90s.
Okay.
I guess the end of the '90s. 2000.
That's when things, if you graphed it out,
that's when things started to really shrink in terms of work. So what happened with me was that work just started, much less work, started drying up, and so I had to decide what I wanted to do because I needed financially to do something, and I had a lot of time, so I went back to school. That's what I did around 2001. So it goes back at least, what is that, 17 years, 18? Where are we? 9, 8? Yeah, that's about when it was.
And you ended up getting a PhD.
I got my doctorate, my DMA,
in
actuality.
Okay. DMA.
Yes, DMA.
Okay, so that's a pretty cool pivot. And you mentioned a little bit that you'd composed prior to that. But had you been composing your whole life, or?
Yeah, kind of, in a way. I mean, I'd always written little jazzy little tunes, little riffs and things like that. When I was at CalArts, I did a little bit of writing, nothing real serious. But I'd always been interested in it. I'd always been interested. I would say I'd always been interested. And so this was an opportunity. It was, to explore it some more. So that's why I got my degrees in composition. And I didn't want to really write film music. I really wanted to write concert music. And so I tried that for a while. And I did. I wrote some pieces, and the pieces still get played. And the bass catalog, I was very busy with it during this time, too. Building the bass catalog. It's still the largest catalog in the world.
Yeah, it's
300 plus titles.
Yeah, and so that was all happening as you were going back to school?
Yes,
okay.
It was. It was. Okay. I think you're right. It definitely was. Certainly when I was getting my master's. And yes, no, I kept going. I used to go religiously to the bass conventions, and I would run the amateur bass forum, whatever they called it, and they play my music. And I got a lot of submissions from people. People would send me stuff to publish. And I was writing new pieces all the dumb time because they say during this period, especially when I came back from South Africa, '85 was the rise of Apple, right? So I got my first Apple back then, Mac Plus or something, and desktop publishing and all this. So that's really what got me going on that. I realized I can publish this stuff, and then I connected with Murray Grodner. Back with Lemur when he had Lemur, and he said, "Okay, I'll take some of your stuff in the catalog." I was very excited that day because Frank Proto was a little bit of inspiration to me because Frank really was before me with doing these sort of arrangements for bass. Take a Haydn trio and arrange the bass cello part for bass. He did a bunch of stuff like that, and so I saw his stuff, bought his stuff, played his stuff. And that's kind of where I went from. I went like 10 times more than he. Because with a computer, which he doesn't really do it that way. I think he's retired now, but he did it in another kind of a way. But for me, with the computer, I was able to write this music and arrange it relatively quickly. And so I did that for a long time. I was super into it.
And that's how I discovered your music. And one of the things that I just loved was, and I think we ordered it through Lemur, actually, because I remember I probably told the orchestra director, Lemur
right.
Music's where you go.
That's
Shout out
right.
to Lemur. But one of the things that struck me immediately was, hey, my students can play these parts. You wrote things that were that in a teaching situation would work. It wasn't all like treble clef up at the top, or it was something that I've got one pretty good bass player, a couple people that first position is about the max, and one person we can kind of coach in the middle. And so much of your titles, worked with groups like that.
I tried to do that.
Yeah.
I tried to have them graded. I tried to have one higher, but then after a while, in my own coaching, I realized that even that's not going to work in every situation, because sometimes you don't have one guy who's better. Right. So then I did a series of like beginning bass ensembles where they're all nobody goes above G harmonic, right? They're all more equal. Yeah. And because, as I said, I found groups where unless I was playing that part, there was much more equality. But I did try to do that and to have some parts would be lower. Plus, I think it sounds better anyways, rather than everybody trying to play, all thumb position kind of a thing. So, yeah, I like to do that. And for me, the bass music really came from me just... Partly was I would go to festivals all over the place, right? When I was the young bass player, and I'd play the trout. Okay, here comes the bass player. Okay, let's get a trout, or let's get a Dvorak string quintet. Mostly trout, really. And I love the trout. I played it many times, but that's about it, really. I mean, the other string players are running off playing Beethoven quartets and Brahms quartets and lovely music, and there just wasn't that much for a bass player. And particularly when I was in orchestras, and then we wanted to do something, and there was nothing for us to do, really. We'd sit around and play Beethoven 5 together, I mean, that's a little too nerdy. So that's where I got the idea to do these, do bass ensembles, just to have stuff for students, but good music, not just etude stuff, like a Ravel or a Brahms, or a Dvorak, something that's beautiful music that anybody could play, so we can play it on the bass.
A question I like to ask people on the podcast is, what advice would they give their 18-year-old self? And here's Barry Kolstein of Kolstein & Sons answering that very question.
I think as an 18-year-old and, or even in my early 20s coming into the shop, everything like that, a lot of it was laid out for me. There was a plan, that I was given a plan, which I often say I've done a good job, and I'm proud of what I've done with the shop, and I continue to be proud. But, I was given an opportunity, and I always respect self-made people, that weren't given that opportunity. It's what you do with the opportunity.
Barry has been providing bassists with opportunities through beautiful instruments, bows, cases, you name it. He's been doing this himself for 50 years, and the shop is celebrating their 70th year in business. Thank you so much for what you do, Barry. Check them out at Kolstein.com, and thank you for sponsoring the podcast. How is it that Upton Bass came to design a bass for Gary Carr? Well, it all started with an email. Here's Eric and Gary from Upton Bass on how this happened.
Gary was at kind of the forefront of ergonomics in commissioning different bass makers to make ergonomic models to his playing style. And he basically replied. He said, yeah, but here's what I'm looking for. I want something, that's this, and this.
He sent us sketches.
Oh, and by the way, I want it affordable that anyone going to my car camp could afford it.
This model has become so popular, and Gary Carr even played it for the 50th anniversary International Society of Bassists convention. He was the opening, he gave the keynote speech, and he played two beautiful selections on his Upton Bass, his Carr model Upton Bass. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. My practicing companion, Modacity, this awesome app. It is so great for getting you to really think about your practicing. And there's what's called a deliberate practice mode. It tracks everything that you are improving upon and time spent in every piece. And it's just so great. Here is founder and CEO of Modacity, Mark Gelfo, on what the app does.
I use the deliberate practice feature in Modacity a ton. So what I'm logging my improvements, I improved my articulation today by using this strategy. And then I see that in my log. So I see all the improvements that I made, the strategy that led to that improvement. I see the star rating as well as the time spent.
It is so satisfying to be able to look back on your history like Mark's describing. I do that all the time, and it keeps me inspired and energized and feeling like I'm really making progress. Learn more at modacity.co. And if you visit our site, we've got a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by Encoda. By the way, that's spelled Nkoda. This app is like Netflix or Spotify for sheet music, and they are working with over 100 of the major publishers like Boozy and Hawkes, Baronwriter, and more to provide sheet music on your device. I have an iPad Pro, but this also works on Android, and I have so many pieces from Encoda loaded up on it. I have all the Beethoven symphonies and their scores. I'm circling things. I'm flipping between the score and the part to show students. I totally love this app, and people like Sir Simon Rattle are singing its praises. It really is the next thing for musicians. It's a subscription service, and you can download Encoda from your app store today for a free trial. That's Nkoda. And thanks for sponsoring the podcast. You now have all these books, 11
books.
11 books.
Right.
And we were seeing some of them last night, and I was looking through a few of them this morning. And you've got all these systems of showing motivic development and showing how this, like how did you become fascinated by orchestration and kind of develop these methods? It's a big topic, but
what happened, I guess, was when I went to get my master's, I got an opportunity to teach through UCLA Extension Department. And I started out as teaching finale. That was really my first thing. I was a finale guy. And then I said, I'd like to, I know they asked me if I wanted to teach Orchestration 1, I guess. I think is the way it worked. And I said, sure. So I just started teaching orchestration and studying it on my own, and having a lot of material to give classes year after year after year. And then I started getting some work as an orchestrator. Right. I started working for Michael Giacchino, who I started in his bass section, and I still play in his bass section. But I let him know, and his head orchestrator at the time was Tim Simonek, that I wanted to be an orchestrator. I would like to have some work with it. And after a couple of years of them ruminating on it, they just brought me into the party. And so I just had developed all this material, and I guess about 6 years ago I put them together in sort of a format that I was able to sell and able to publish. And one thing led to the other, sort of like the bass music. Once I sort of got the bug of how this thing works, and once I got the website and got the network, then I started writing more books. And then I started, once I got my doctorate, then I started having teaching opportunities where I would be actually just hired as a teacher. And so then I would be teaching orchestration and theory classes and music history classes and the bass as well and comp classes. So I started seeing the need for this material.
I was listening to this podcast. I'm blanking on the name, but I'll link to it. And you were talking in detail about orchestration. And something that was really interesting is you're talking about what it's like working in a DAW for a certain project versus maybe getting something and you're working on it in Sibelius and fleshing it out. And you were even talking about just like basically getting like triads and a melody line and just talk about the different modalities that an orchestrator finds himself working in.
Well, the challenge these days is that most composers work in their DAW, right? Financially, first, of course, and so people are writing great mock-ups. It's all in the DAW, and which the problems that come with that is that they don't have that much familiarity really with the instruments themselves, the orchestral instruments. They don't have familiarity with it. I mean, they don't sometimes I haven't heard them played live. Oh, and is that good or bad? It's neither good nor bad, but it's a challenge for somebody if you're writing music for orchestra and you don't, and your knowledge of the orchestral instruments is not very deep. For instance, if I asked you to write a piece for guitar and you'd never heard a guitar, well, whatever you write is not going to be too characteristically effective, right? And so that's really where a lot of the work that I do with students is that they're graduating all sorts of places, Berkeley and every places, and they come out very well trained in lots of different ways. But their knowledge of how orchestral instruments will blend and their power in terms of their range and the techniques that you and I know as a string player in terms of what is bowing and what is phrasing. All of these things are lacking, and those things can make your mock-up sound 100 times better. And when you do get the chance to work with live players, it can mean the difference between your session being successful or your session sort of disintegrating into questions and nobody knows what the heck is going on, and you're pressed for time and you just got to get what you can.
Well, and you want people, you brought this up last night, it's a great point. You want people to like playing your music. And one of the examples you played was, there was a melody in the firsts, and I'm forgetting the piece exactly, and then it was the melody. Yeah, Psycho, yeah. It was melody in the first and then the melody in the seconds. Why you brought, which is a very good question. Why not just have the first play? Get the seconds involved. Give them something to do. And that's something when I do my own, modest arrangements of string pieces, I'd be thinking about all the time. It's like, I don't want those basses to be bored back there. I don't want those violas to be bored back there. So I do, and if it's not in the right range, if it's something funky or bizarre that doesn't occur in real world music,
right.
It's so important.
It is. And, because we're bass players, and I guess most of the folks listening to this are bass players, we know all too well what it's like to sit in a piece and not, and have not partake of the musical material. And there's some wonderful pieces that do that. And it's a damn drag, where everything that's melodic is given to the shells. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's what happens. I mean, all we're left to doing is just playing footballs on pieces. And very much unnecessary, right? I mean, the basses can play something lyrical. So the point is that we're acutely aware of it as bass players. Bass players are good composers and good arrangers and orchestrators, some of the best, really, because we're sitting in the back, and then we're hearing everything, right? We're hearing it from the ground up. Right.
I love hearing you say this because this is one of my favorite theories. I was going to ask this, but you're bringing it. I have this theory that more bass players go into composition, orchestration, and conducting than your average musician. I might be biased because I'm a bass player, but I think there's something about being back there, watching the whole orchestra, playing the...
Being bored.
Being bored, yes, exactly. You're not a first violin trying to learn
right.
Pages of notes, and something about being at that foundational level, seeing the structure.
Yeah.
This is my theory, but
I think it's a good theory. I mean, it's the same thing like rock and roll. I mean, there's a personality of the guys or gal who wants to be in front, right? They want the eyes, the guitarists, the sax players, the keyboard players. They love it. They want to be up there, and bass players are more content to be in the back, kind of controlling events and keeping things moving. And but I do think you're right about that. The point is because the movement of the bass, without talking about this for really too involved, but the movement of the bass in the composition is like the most damn important thing. You can listen to, I think it was Brahms. People would bring a composition over to Brahms, and he would put his hand in the middle of the page and just see the melody and the bass line. That's all he was looking at, to analyze the piece. He didn't need all the stuff in the middle. So how your bass line moves, right, melodically and having a contrapuntal bass part and something interesting affects the piece so much. And so as bass players, we're always thinking that movement, harmonic movement, right? And so you're right. I think that you're forced, if you're aware and paying attention, which not always happens, right? But if it's something that interests you, putting together the music, then being a bass player is great because you see it structurally, right? And then you know what your part is. You're not just. And unfortunately, orchestral musicians are really not that knowledgeable. Even ones in symphony orchestras, they've been trained. It's probably better now. I mean, but they're wonderfully trained in their parts, in their technical abilities. But they don't often know. Oh, the violin. Now I'm playing my part now. That was played earlier by the oboe. Or I'm playing my part now with another instrument over there. So they don't know that, but they don't need to in some ways because they have academic people to do that.
I remember, I think I was pretty unaware growing up too, and I remember playing with a bassist named Joe Conyers, who's been on the podcast. He's assistant principal bass in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he was one of the first people who were sitting in rehearsal, and he said, listen to how that line just went over the second clarinet.
Uh-huh.
Listen to the way the cello and those horns are blending on that. And he wasn't like, he was just making observations. And I was like, wow, Joe listens to the orchestra in a totally different way.
Good for Joe. That's great. I mean, I like to do that, and that's why, as I was talking to you earlier, that's part of the reason why I'm still playing bass. Because even if I'm doing a job, or like a studio job that can be boring, or any job that I'm doing that's sort of boring-ish, if you can focus on these different aspects of it, you don't have to just look at your part. I love looking around the orchestra. Sometimes you don't have to look at your part. I mean, maybe you're not even doing anything. It's amazing. You look at people in orchestra; they have like 25 bars rest. They're sitting there, 1, 2. They're staring at the music, like for 25 measures, like they're going to lose their place. I mean, you can look around, and you're still counting in your head. You know what I mean? So. That's a lot of fun. Orchestra is still a lot of fun.
Well, it's great to hang out with you.
Definitely.
All your music is, I was clicking through, it's all up online. You can find it. And you have all these, both string orchestra and full orchestra orchestrations of our standard rep.
Right. Yeah. The bass catalog is still the world's largest bass catalog with over 300 titles. Ludwin music with bass in mind. Anybody can find it. And even though I've gone off in other directions and don't put that much time in the new material up there, there's still a lot of great stuff. From bass solos to trios, keyboard, bass and keyboards, chamber music, all sorts of good stuff. So I encourage people to check that out. But yes, the stuff I sell a lot of through Lux Music, really, and my own website, and other ones, but are the concerto arrangements. So I've done orchestral arrangements of pretty much all the standard bass concertos. Capuzzi, Dittersdorf, Van Hall, Bottesini, Kusevitsky, who did I leave off? I don't know. Maybe Eccles even.
Yeah. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that up there. Yep.
And people buy that a lot. And I have both solo and orchestral tuning. Some of them are full orchestra and string. Some of them are just string, just because it's, just some of the ensembles it just works with strings better. So yeah, I'm glad I did that, and people enjoy that, and they play them a lot, and it's good because there weren't really that when I started. It was very difficult to get concertos. They were like coming from Europe, and they cost a lot of money, and they were all falling apart, and they didn't make an awful lot of sense really. So yes, so I'm glad I did. Those concertos. Yeah, enjoy that.
And how many emails, can't even count, people have said, hey, I need a string version of Kusevitsky, or I need a string version of this, or I need a full orchestra version. So it's great that you have that up there. I love you sell through Lux. I love the Lux folks. Back when I was teaching high school orchestra, I'd basically just pick up the phone and call Lux and
Lux are good people. They're very nice people. So my stuff can be through Lux, of course. It can be through the website. And if people are interested in the books, you mentioned the 11 books. Yeah, I have lots of stuff. It doesn't focus primarily on the bass, but I always try to include a chapter or two about the bass. I have one chapter in my book on strings where I show repertoire. Starting with, let's say, Brandenburg 3. Like, look at this. This is a tough piece to play. It's still tough to play. The low notes are still tough to play that accurately. And show composers, Beethoven, show them Ein Heldenleben. show them Bottesini. This is show them Mahler. You can write for the bass. You can write challenging for the bass. The bass doesn't have to be simplified down to nothingness. It sounds a lot more exciting. And I have examples when I teach people. Here's an example with a bass doubling the cello, right? And here's a part with the bass simplified. And listen, it doesn't have the energy or the interest. And you simplify the bass part. And the bass part's not difficult that I'm showing you. It's very playable. And the reason by showing them, look, here's Beethoven 5. Every kid plays stupid Beethoven 5, right? We learn how to play Beethoven 5. It's not, advanced studies. This is part of the repertoire. So I just try to do that to let them know that bass, we don't have to handicap. We don't have to handicap our parts for the bass player.
Yeah. It's true. Well, I love what you do. I love going through these. I love geeking out on scores, and I feel like it helps me as a player. It helps me think more creatively about playing. So I love it. I can't wait to dig in even more to these books. And thanks for spending some time.
Well, thank you for coming to the talk last night, and thank you for doing this talk today. I really appreciate it. Connecting with you, connecting out with the bass players, and it's a wonderful thing. So thank you.
Norman, thank you for sitting down and chatting. It was so much fun. Folks, you can check out more about what he's up to and all his books and everything we talked about at his website, which is musicnewapproach.com, or just go to the show notes for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I know Norman appreciates it. And maybe you're new, maybe you've been around for a decade or longer, but it's just so great to have you along in this journey with me. And I'd love to hear from you. If you haven't reached out, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Just say hi, or if you have a guest idea, let me know. I keep track of all of that. And everybody I talk to these days is the result of a recommendation from someone in this community. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, award-winning basses. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper for cataloging and archiving everything we talk about here on the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.